Senator Josh Hawley thought he could embarrass Jasmine Crockett in front of the entire Senate committee. He came prepared with talking points, rehearsed lines, and that signature smirk that had gotten him through countless political battles. But what happened next left him completely speechless. In less than 2 minutes, Representative Crockett didn't just defend herself, she dismantled Hawley's entire argument so thoroughly that he literally got up and walked out of the hearing room. The cameras caught everything. The silence that followed was deafening. If you're tired of politicians getting away with cheap shots, you need to see this. Hit that like button now, because what you're about to witness is pure political justice. The Senate Judiciary Committee room was packed that Tuesday morning. Committee room 216 in the Hart Senate office building had seen plenty of heated exchanges, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold. The topic was supposed to be routine discussion about voting rights legislation that had been bouncing around Congress for months. But Josh Hawley had other plans. He'd been waiting for this moment, this chance to go after one of the rising stars of the Democratic Party. Jasmine Crockett had been making waves, calling out Republican hypocrisy wherever she found it. Her social media clips went viral. Her floor speeches got millions of views, and that bothered Josh Hawley more than he cared to admit. So when he saw her name on the witness list, he knew this was his shot. The morning started normally enough. Chairman Dick Durbin called the hearing to order. A few opening statements from committee members, some back and forth about procedure. Standard Washington theater. But when it was Hawley's turn to speak, the energy in the room shifted. He adjusted his tie, looked directly at Representative Crockett, and smiled that smile, the one that said he thought he was about to destroy someone's day. Representative Crockett, he began, his Missouri accent thick with condescension. I have to say, watching you on social media lately has been quite entertaining. A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how these hearings usually started. Crockett didn't flinch. She sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table in front of her, eyes locked on Hawley. She'd dealt with men like him her entire career, first as a public defender in Dallas, now in Congress. She knew exactly what he was trying to do. Is there a question coming, Senator? She asked, her voice calm and level. That's when Hawley made his first mistake. He thought her calmness meant he was winning. To understand what happened next, you need to know who these two people really are. Josh Hawley arrived in the Senate in 2019 with big ambitions and even bigger ego. Yale Law School, Supreme Court clerk, Attorney General of Missouri. His resume was impressive, and he never let anyone forget it. He'd built his political brand on being the conservative fighter who wasn't afraid to take on anyone, anywhere. But lately, things hadn't been going his way. His role in the 6th of January had damaged his reputation. Fundraising was down, and younger, more charismatic Republicans were getting the attention he thought he deserved. He needed a win, and he thought Jasmine Crockett would be an easy target. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Jasmine Crockett grew up in St. Louis, the daughter of 2 parents who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. She put herself through law school, spent years in the trenches as a public defender, and won her seat in Congress by beating an incumbent who thought she was too young, too inexperienced, too everything. She'd heard it all before. Men in expensive suits telling her she didn't belong, that she didn't understand how things worked, that she should know her place. The difference now was that she had a platform to fight back, and boy, was she about to use it. The stakes here went beyond just 2 politicians going at each other. This was about representation, about respect, about whether young women of color in politics would be treated as equals or as targets for cheap political points. Hawley represented the old guard, privileged, entitled, used to getting his way through intimidation and institutional power. Crockett represented something new, authentic, prepared, and absolutely unafraid to call out hypocrisy wherever she found it. The room was full of reporters, staffers, and lobbyists who could sense that something big was about to happen. You could feel the tension building. Phones were being quietly pulled out to record. This wasn't going to be just another boring committee hearing. Hawley leaned back in his chair, that smirk getting wider. He thought he had her exactly where he wanted her. In his mind, he was about to school a freshman congresswoman in front of the entire political world. What he didn't know was that Crockett had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Let me ask you something, Representative, Hawley continued, his voice dripping with fake politeness. Do you think the American people take you seriously when you spend more time making TikTok videos than actually legislating? The room went quiet. Even for Washington, This was a low blow. Several committee members looked uncomfortable. Chairman Durbin opened his mouth to intervene, but Crockett held up a slight hand. She could handle this herself. "Senator Hawley," she began, her voice still calm but with an edge that made everyone lean forward. "Are you referring to my videos explaining complex legislation in terms that working families can actually understand? Or are you talking about something else?" Hawley's smirk faltered for just a second. This wasn't the defensive response he was expecting. "I'm talking about the undignified nature of—" "Undignified," Crockett interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "Senator, weren't you the one who raised your fist to a crowd of protesters right before they stormed the Capitol?" The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the sound of pens hitting paper as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Hawley's face went red. "That's completely out of line," he shot back. "You're twisting." "I'm stating facts," Crockett said, cutting him off again. "You want to talk about dignity? Let's talk about dignity." She reached for a folder in front of her, thick, well-organized, clearly prepared. Hawley was starting to realize he might have picked the wrong fight. "Let's talk about the time you wrote a whole book about how big tech was destroying American masculinity, then begged those same tech companies for campaign donations." Hawley was trying to interrupt, but Crockett wasn't having it. "Or let's talk about how you voted against aid for Hurricane Ida victims, then flew to Cancun during a winter storm in your own state." I never went to Cancun during." "You're right," Crockett said with a slight smile. "That was your buddy Ted Cruz. You just voted against helping your own constituents, and then went fundraising in Florida instead." The accuracy was devastating. Every fact was correct. Every detail was precise. This wasn't just a emotional outburst. This was a systematic takedown backed by receipts. Senator Amy Klobuchar, sitting 2 seats down from Hawley, was trying not to smile. Even some of the Republican staffers in the back were taking notes, probably thinking about how they were going to spin this disaster for their boss. Hawley tried to regain control. "Representative Crockett, with all due respect." "Respect?" Crockett's voice cut through the room like a knife. "You want to talk about respect? You came into this hearing with prepared talking points designed to embarrass me because you think a young black woman from Texas will be an easy target for your fundraising emails." The truth hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the room knew she was right. This wasn't about legislation or policy. This was about Hawley trying to score cheap political points, and everyone could see it. "But here's what you didn't count on," Crockett continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. "I came prepared. I came with facts, and I came ready to show everyone exactly who Josh Hawley really is." Hawley was squirming now. His aide behind him was frantically writing notes, probably trying to figure out how to get his boss out of this mess. The confident politician who had started this exchange was nowhere to be seen. "Senator, you called my social media presence undignified. Let me ask you something. What's more undignified? Making videos that help people understand their government, or writing books about masculinity while running away from protesters at your own riot?" The reference to the 6th of January, specifically the famous photo of Hawley running through the Capitol hall shit like a thunderclap. Someone in the gallery actually laughed out loud before quickly stifling it. Hawley's face was now bright red. His hands were clenched. The confident senator who had started this fight was completely unraveling, and everyone was watching it happen in real time. But Crockett wasn't done. Not even close. "You know what, Senator? Since you want to make this personal, let's make it personal." What happened next was absolutely brutal. Crockett opened her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She held it up just high enough for the cameras to see, but not high enough for anyone to read the details. "Senator Hawley, this is your voting record from the last 2 years. Should I read it out loud?" Hawley tried to object. "That's not relevant to." "It's absolutely relevant." Crockett shot back. "You questioned my qualifications and my seriousness. So let's compare records." She looked down at the paper, then back up at Hawley with laser focus. "In the last Congress, you missed 47% of your votes. That's almost half, Senator. I've missed 3%. The number hit like a physical blow. Several people in the room audibly gasped. Missing votes is one of the cardinal sins in Congress. It's literally the main part of the job. "But wait, it gets better," Crockett continued, flipping to another page. "Of the votes you did show up for, 89% were straight party line votes. No independent thought. No consideration of your constituents' actual needs. Just follow the leader. Collect the paycheck. Hawley was trying to interrupt, but his voice was weak now. Those statistics are taken out of context. Context. Crockett's voice rose. Let me give you some context. While you were writing your masculinity book and giving speeches about American values, I was in committee hearings at 7 a.m., reading bills that actually help people. She pulled out another document. I've co-sponsored 23 pieces of bipartisan legislation. You've co-sponsored 4. I've held 15 town halls in my district. You've held 2 in yours. I've brought $47 million in federal funding back to Texas. You've brought, she paused dramatically, looking at the paper, $12 million back to Missouri, and most of that went to projects that benefit your donors, not your voters. The room was dead silent except for the clicking of cameras and the scratching of pens on paper. This wasn't just a political argument anymore. This was a masterclass in preparation meeting opportunity. But then Crockett did something unexpected. Her voice got quieter, more personal. You know what really bothers me, Senator? It's not that you're lazy. It's not even that you're hypocritical. It's that you use your platform to tear down people who are actually trying to do the work. She looked directly at him, and for the first time since this started, there was genuine emotion in her voice. I represent people who work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. Single mothers who can't afford childcare. Veterans who can't get the health care they were promised. And while I'm fighting for them, you're writing books about how social media is destroying America and fundraising off of attacks on people like me. The personal nature of the attack was devastating because it was true. Everyone in that room knew it was true. You want to know what's undignified, Senator? What's undignified is a man who went to Yale Law School, who clerked for the Supreme Court, who has every advantage this country can offer, using his position to punch down at people who are actually doing the work. Hawley tried one more time to regain control. Representative Crockett, you're clearly emotional about this. That was his second mistake. His first was starting this fight. His second was calling her emotional. Crockett's eyes flashed. When she spoke again, her voice was ice cold. Emotional, Senator? I'm not emotional. I'm factual. And the facts are these. She stood up slightly, leaning forward toward the microphone. You are a trust fund kid who cosplays as a populist. You are a political opportunist who changes positions based on which way the wind is blowing. You are a sitting United States senator who spends more time on Twitter than in committee hearings. And you just tried to embarrass me because you thought I would be too intimidated to fight back. She paused, letting each word sink in. But here's what you didn't understand. I'm not intimidated by you. I'm not impressed by your degrees or your donor list or your book deals. I'm here to do a job, and part of that job is calling out politicians who are more interested in performance than in public service. She sat back down, her hands folded calmly on the table. So, if you have any questions about the voting rights legislation we're supposed to be discussing today, I'm happy to answer them. But if you're just here to make speeches for your YouTube channel, maybe you should stick to what you do best, which, based on your voting record, appears to be nothing. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. Hawley sat there for a full 10 seconds, his mouth slightly open, staring at Crockett like he couldn't believe what had just happened. His aide behind him was frantically tapping on his phone, probably trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. And then, incredibly, Josh Hawley did something that shocked everyone in the room. He got up and walked out. Not just to take a break, not to confer with staff. He literally gathered his papers, stood up, and left the hearing room while the cameras were still rolling. A sitting United States senator, embarrassed so thoroughly by a freshman representative that he couldn't even stay in the room. The sound of his footsteps echoing in the hallway was the only noise for a solid 30 seconds. Chairman Durbin finally broke the silence. Well, let's move on to the next question. But everyone in that room knew what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just a political argument. It was a complete demolition. Within minutes, the video was everywhere. Hawley walkout started trending on Twitter before the hearing was even over. The clip of Crockett's takedown was shared thousands of times in the first hour. News outlets that usually take hours to report on committee hearings were pushing breaking news alerts. But the real impact was just beginning. In Missouri, Hawley's constituents were watching their senator get systematically dismantled by a woman half his age. Local news stations were already calling for comments. Radio shows were playing the audio on repeat. Sarah Mitchell, a teacher from Kansas City, tweeted, "Josh Hawley is supposed to represent me. This woman from Texas is doing more for working families in 10 minutes than he's done in 4 years." The tweet got 50,000 likes. In Texas, Crockett's phone was blowing up with messages from colleagues, constituents, and complete strangers. Her chief of staff was fielding interview requests from every major news network, but the most telling reactions came from inside the Beltway. Republican senators who usually defended each other no matter what were notably silent. No one was rushing to Hawley's defense. No one was calling Crockett's response inappropriate or out of line, because they all knew she was right. Senator Mitt Romney, when asked for comment by a reporter in the hallway, just shook his head and said, "Josh should have known better." Even more devastating was the response from Hawley's own staff. Multiple sources told reporters that staffers were embarrassed by their boss's performance and his decision to walk out. One aide, speaking anonymously, said he had 2 weeks to prepare for this hearing, and this is what he came up with. Amateur hour. The impact went beyond just politics. Young women across the country were sharing the video with captions like, "This is what standing up for yourself looks like," and "Never let them intimidate you." Maya Patel, a 22-year-old college student in California, posted on TikTok, "Jasmine Crockett just showed me how to deal with bullies. Come prepared, stick to facts, and don't let them see you sweat." The video got 2.3 million views, but perhaps the most significant reaction came from an unexpected source: Hawley's own constituents. Within 48 hours, a group called Missouri Deserves Better had formed, dedicated to finding a primary challenger for Hawley in his next election. Their founding statement read, "If our senator can't handle a prepared argument from a fellow member of Congress, how can he handle the challenges facing our state?" The group raised $50,000 in their first week. Meanwhile, Crockett was being invited to speak at colleges, conferences, and political events across the country. The woman who Hawley thought would be an easy target had become one of the most sought-after speakers in Democratic politics. But Crockett wasn't letting it go to her head. In an interview with CNN 3 days after the hearing, she was characteristically direct. "I didn't come to Congress to get famous or to go viral. I came here to work. But if standing up to bullies and calling out hypocrisy makes me famous, I can live with that." The interviewer asked if she had any regrets about how she handled Hawley. "My only regret," she said with a slight smile, "is that he left before I could ask him about his book sales." The long-term implications of that 5-minute exchange were enormous. For Hawley, it marked the beginning of a serious decline in his political influence. Colleagues stopped taking him seriously. Donors started looking elsewhere. And worst of all, for a politician who had built his brand on being a fighter, he was now known as the guy who got schooled so badly he had to leave the room. For Crockett, it was a launching pad. Within 6 months, she was being mentioned as a potential candidate for Senate, governor, even higher office. The woman who had been dismissed as just another social media politician had proven she could handle the biggest stage in American politics. But the real winners were the American people who got to see what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when substance beats style, and when someone finally stands up to a bully with facts instead of fear. The video of that exchange has been watched over 50 million times across all platforms. It's used in political science classes as an example of effective communication. It's shared in corporate training sessions about standing up to workplace bullies. And every time someone watches it, they see the same thing. What happens when someone who's done the work meets someone who's just playing politics? Hawley returned to the committee hearing later that day, but the damage was done. He sat quietly through the rest of the proceedings, avoiding eye contact with Crockett and speaking only when directly asked a question. When reporters cornered him afterward, asking why he had left the hearing, he mumbled something about having other commitments and hurried away. But everyone knew the truth. Josh Hawley had tried to embarrass Jasmine Crockett, and instead, she had ended his reputation as a serious political figure in less than 5 minutes. And the best part? She did it all without raising her voice, without losing her composure, and without breaking a single rule of Senate decorum. She just came prepared, told the truth, and let the facts speak for themselves. In politics, Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. The lesson here is simple. Never underestimate someone who's done their homework. And if this story inspired you to demand better from your own representatives, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share this with everyone who needs to see it. Because when people like Jasmine Crockett stand up to bullies like Josh Hawley, we all need to make sure the whole world gets to watch. The political world had been reminded of something important that day. Respect isn't given because of your title or your resume. It's earned through your actions, your preparation, and your willingness to stand up for what's right. And Jasmine Crockett had earned more respect in 5 minutes than Josh Hawley had in his entire political career. But the story doesn't end there. The ripple effects of that confrontation continued to spread for months afterward, reshaping political dynamics in ways no one could have predicted. What the cameras didn't show was equally revealing. According to multiple sources in the Senate, Hawley spent the next hour in his office with the door closed, reportedly having what one aide described as a complete meltdown. Phone calls were made to damage control specialists. Emergency meetings were called with his communications team. By evening, Hawley's office had gone through 3 different explanations for why he left the hearing. First, they said he had a scheduling conflict. When reporters pointed out that the hearing was on his official calendar, they changed it to a family emergency. When no family emergency materialized, they finally settled on the truth. He had been caught off guard by Crockett's aggressive tactics. The problem was calling Crockett's fact-based response. Aggressive tactics only made things worse. Women across America immediately recognized the coded language. When a woman speaks with authority and backs up her arguments with facts, she's being aggressive. When a man does the same thing, he's being strong or decisive. Dr. Amanda Richardson, a political science professor at Georgetown University, wrote in the Washington Post, "The Hawley-Crockett exchange perfectly illustrates the double standard women face in politics. Crockett came prepared with facts, spoke calmly and deliberately, and dismantled his arguments piece by piece. Yet Hawley's team characterized this as aggressive. If the roles were reversed, Hawley would be praised for his command of the facts and strong leadership." Back in Missouri, the reaction was swift and brutal. Local newspapers that had previously supported Hawley began publishing editorials questioning his effectiveness. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran a particularly scathing piece titled, "When Your Senator Can't Handle Basic Questioning." Talk radio, traditionally friendly territory for Hawley, turned skeptical. Host Mike Stevens on MOCKS told his listeners, "Look, I've supported Josh Hawley since day one, but watching him get schooled by someone half his age and then run away, that's not the Missouri fighting spirit I know." The calls that came in agreed. Listener after listener expressed embarrassment that their senator had been so thoroughly outmatched by someone from another state. But perhaps the most damaging response came from an unexpected source. Missouri farmers. Tom Brennan, a corn and soybean farmer from northwest Missouri, had voted for Hawley twice. But after watching the exchange, he started asking questions about what his senator had actually accomplished for agriculture in the state. "I spent 2 hours going through Hawley's record on farm issues," Brennan told the Kansas City Star. "Turns out, he's voted against every major piece of agricultural legislation that would have helped Missouri farmers. Meanwhile, this woman from Texas has co-sponsored bills that would directly benefit Missouri agriculture. Makes you wonder who's really fighting for the Midwest." Brennan's story was shared thousands of times on Facebook, particularly in rural Missouri communities, where Hawley had previously been popular. Meanwhile, in Texas, Crockett was being treated like a returning hero. Governor Greg Abbott, despite being a Republican, privately told colleagues that he respected her preparation and professionalism. But the real celebration was happening at the grassroots level. In Dallas, Crockett's old law firm held a watch party for the video. Her former colleagues cheered at every devastating fact she delivered. Maria Santos, a paralegal who had worked with Crockett for 3 years, told local news, "This is exactly how she was in court, always prepared, never rattled, and she could spot a weak argument from a mile away." Josh Hawley just learned what hundreds of prosecutors in Dallas already knew: don't come for Jasmine unless you've done your homework. The video became required viewing at the University of Texas Law School. Professor James Mitchell told his students, This is a masterclass in how to handle hostile questioning. Notice how she never loses her composure, how every response is backed by verifiable facts, and how she turns his attack back on him without ever descending to his level. The exchange didn't just affect Hawley, and Crockett sent shockwaves through both parties. Republican strategists began quietly advising their clients to avoid confrontational tactics unless they were absolutely certain they could win. The phrase, "pulling a Hawley," entered the political lexicon, meaning to start a fight you're not prepared to finish. Democratic leaders, meanwhile, began studying Crockett's approach. House Speaker Hakeem Jeffries reportedly called her personally to congratulate her and ask for advice on handling Republican attacks. "Jasmine showed us something important," one senior Democratic aide told Politico. "You don't have to play defense all the time. Sometimes the best defense is a well-prepared offense backed by solid facts." News networks couldn't get enough of the story. CNN's Anderson Cooper called it one of the most effective political takedowns in recent memory. Fox News, despite their usual support for Republican senators, struggled to defend Hawley's performance. Even conservative commentator Ben Shapiro admitted, "Look, I disagree with Crockett on policy, but you have to respect her preparation and execution. She came to a knife fight with facts, and facts won." The exchange became a case study in political communication programs across the country. Students analyzed everything from Crockett's body language to her strategic use of pauses for maximum impact. For Hawley personally, the damage went beyond just political embarrassment. Book sales for his Masculinity Manifesto plummeted. Speaking engagements were quietly cancelled. Even his hometown newspaper in Lexington, Missouri, ran an editorial suggesting he consider focusing on actual governing instead of performance art. His wife, Erin, reportedly told friends that she was embarrassed by his behavior and had advised him against picking the fight in the first place. But perhaps the most important impact of the Hawley-Crockett exchange was what it said about the changing nature of American politics. For too long, political discourse had been dominated by who could shout the loudest, who could deliver the best insult, who could create the most viral moment regardless of truth or substance. Crockett showed a different way. She proved that preparation beats bluster, that facts beat fiction, and that authentic representation beats political performance. Young people, in particular, took notice. Applications to law school and political science programs saw a noticeable uptick in the months following the exchange. When asked why they were interested in politics, many applicants specifically cited the Jasmine Crockett example. 6 months later, the impact was still being felt. Hawley's approval ratings in Missouri had dropped 15 points. He'd gone from a potential presidential candidate to someone fighting for his political survival. Crockett, meanwhile, had been invited to speak at the Democratic National Convention, had a New York Times best-selling book deal, and was being courted by every major political organization in the country. But she remained focused on the work. In a follow-up interview 6 months later, she was characteristically direct. "I didn't go viral because I was trying to go viral. I went viral because I was prepared. I told the truth. And I didn't back down when someone tried to intimidate me. If more politicians approached their jobs that way, maybe people would trust government more." The truth was simple. In an era of political theater and social media stunts, Jasmine Crockett had reminded everyone what actual leadership looked like. And Josh Hawley had learned the hard way that in politics, as in life, there's no substitute for doing your homework. The video of their exchange continues to be shared, studied, and celebrated as an example of what happens when someone who's done the work meets someone who's just playing politics. And every time someone watches it, they're reminded of a fundamental truth. Respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And on that Tuesday morning in a Senate committee room, Jasmine Crockett earned hers while Josh Hawley lost his.